The tall, human-like figure moved about the thick trees with no struggle at all. It was as if it were floating. It made no noise, and the only movement seen was the creature lunging forward. It was graceful, yet terrifying. My eyes grew as I watched it skim over a frozen lake and back into the trees. I tried to make out its facial features, but I couldn't. Perhaps it was the fog, or my lack of concentration. I was just relieved that I hadn't seen its face, even though I tried. I'm sure it was just as horrifying as the tentacle-like bones extending from the creature's back. Time stood still, and I froze the closer it got. Why I was approaching this thing anyways? That, I still don't know. Something about it was inviting, though. Something about it made me want to come to it. My heart was pounding at a fast rate, but my legs were moving forward faster as I tried to chase after the creature. I turned a sharp corner and looked right behind it, but stopped suddenly dead in my tracks when I saw it had stopped itself. In front of it was a small girl, around 9 years of age. She stared up in horror, and fear for her life as well as mine. I tried to wave her off, but to no avail. She seemed captivated by the creature's appearance, the way I had been. She slowly stood up, and as she did, I fell back and crawled behind a bush. I couldn't look away, and all I did was watch. The creature brought its face closer to hers, and as it did, her eyes grew, and she began to shake. Covering her ears, she was terrified, and compared to her, I had nothing to be afraid of. She was only inches away from the being, and she was now looking at it face to face. I'd never seen something take itself so considerably deeply, and yet to such terror to the eyes of a child. The little girl fell, but as I took a step closer, I could see her small chest filling out with air and releasing it. She wasn't dead. She was just unconscious. I took a closer look at it, and from my observation, I concluded that the being's gender was male. It took her and dragged her behind it. He was slowly creeping ahead of this time, and I felt the need to follow, so of course, I did with no hesitation. I was at this point that I couldn't even think. After several minutes of following, he stopped at the clearing. The trees that surrounded the empty area were draped with ropes and nooses. Mutilated bodies and limbs were hanging from them. One body had been hung slowly, I could tell. The fingers that were once looked remotely human had been clawed at its own throat, trying to break free from the noose. What was this? There had been at least 30 murders committed here. I looked at the terror at my surroundings, guts hanging out from the torn skin, people with gouged out eyes. I began to panic, and soon I felt tears streaming down my face. Then I turned my attention to the little girl. The poor little girl had been gutted in the short amount of time it took me to realize where we were at. Her eyes were gone, and her limbs had been cut off, but the creature was gripping the stubs of the slowly bleeding child. I only cried harder when I saw her working at displaced lungs and her beating heart. Everything was still working, because nothing had been removed fully. She was still alive. With one movement, the creature ripped her heart away from what had been keeping it beating. I gagged and almost vomited, but stopped myself. I couldn't let this happen to me. Not like all those other people had. I couldn't let myself be heard, but my body was frozen, so I couldn't turn around and run away. Then he hung what was left of her body up from the rope. The surrounding trees had died, I noticed. He stopped all his movements while hanging the child's left arm up. He knew of my presence, and he quickly turned around and faced me. Terror took over me, and I tried to let out a scream for help, but I couldn't. I knew this is what death himself looked like. I saw nothing. He was faceless. He had no face, and yet he was the most terrifying thing I'd ever laid eyes on. Right as he turned around, I heard a faint shrieking noise, a very loud, ear-piercing buzzing. The kind you hear from a TV that's lost service and shows nothing but static. And it's in hearing this, I saw what seemed to look like static as well. Everything around me began to spin and blur into nothing but black. Though, before it did, the creature revealed it to me that it did have a mouth. And how he did this still pains me to think about. How he showed me no pain, but instead a murderous grin. The pale skin that should have been a face slowly stretched until it ripped open in the form of a mouth. Parts of his skin were still intact, and the skin on the corner of its new formed mouth ripped up words to form a contented smile. I knew I was seeing what the girl had seen, and I knew I was hearing what she'd heard as well. I was now unconscious, and I felt for sure I wouldn't wake up. What happened next shocked me. I didn't know why he didn't kill me, and I didn't know why he'd taken me to a different part of the woods before I had a chance to wake. But for whatever reason, he spared me. And I know why now, because I read about it. This creature was the Slenderman. And now that I read more about him, I know that his normal prey are children. And that alone is the only reason why he didn't waste his time on me. Even though he'd had the perfect opportunity to kill me. He didn't because I wasn't a child. Maybe he simply got sick of the joy from murdering innocents. But I don't want to know. And you shouldn't want to know either. I'd like this to be the last time I ever talk about it, though. Though it might be my only time now. Please be cautious, and for whatever reason you may go into the woods, don't. If you decide to go and you spot the Slenderman, look away right as you do. And don't look any longer, or the same thing will happen to you. And trust me, once you see him, he will reveal himself to you a lot more than once. He still, to this day, follows me. Please don't let the same thing that happened